All right. Again, good evening to those of you watching us from Eastern Time, and very good night for you watching us elsewhere. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the first of a series of Mountada debates hosted by the Syrian Forum, where we host movers, shakers, important people discussing topics that are related to Syria, developments in Syria after the fall of the Assad regime, the new government, its role, its functions, its problems, its issues, all in an attempt to draw a critical eye on all issues related to Syria, conveying those to those in the Syrian American community first and foremost, but also to those English speakers who are interested in all things related to Syria, conveying a Syrian perspective about all these things. My name is Jamal Mansour, and I will be the host tonight. I thank Mr. Qutaiba Idlbi, the Director of the Americas at the Foreign Ministry, for joining us tonight. I know he battled Damascus traffic, and to those of you who know Damascus traffic, he's done a great job arriving a little late, but not too late. Thank you for joining us, Qutaiba. Thank you for making it tonight. Thank you for allowing us to have you as our first guest. I want to ask you first and foremost, how's the new job? How are you settling in? What was happening before, and what is happening right now?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jamal. And thanks to Syrian Forum for having me, and apologies for the delay for everyone watching at home.
It's Damascus traffic,
especially in Damascus. Yeah, it's quite late for them. Well, I mean, I've been in Washington before this job for a little bit over 12 years. My main work has been policy development around Syria. So it seemed like a natural evolution for me, basically. Moving from the streets of Damascus to Washington, working on policy, and then coming back
Moving
here,
back.
basically, yes. As I tell many people, when I got to Washington in 2013, many asked me, why did you choose Washington? And I told them I believe in 6,660 miles titanium bridge between Damascus and Washington. And that I was in Washington to start building that bridge from over there. So I guess what I'm doing here right now is just building the other side of the bridge.
That's a big construction site.
Yeah.
So before we get into the topic that we want to tackle tonight, how's the construction? How's the construction work advancing, you think?
I mean, not easy, of course. We come, of course, we're working with the administration with a lot of real estate development, I guess, in a sense. Not only in terms of the actual real estate, but also in terms of the development of relations. So I think as Syrians, we're very lucky to have this sort of administration sort of perspective in Washington that is very much focused on building relations. I think it's an echo to really the mentality in Damascus today, which is focusing on shifting from 50 years of foreign policy based on blackmailing, based on instigating instability across the region in different areas of the world, to a foreign policy based on partnerships, based on economic development, and based on benefits for all.
Right. So thank you for this. We're going to go into the meat of the matter, basically, and talk about Suweida in a second. I'm here to moderate. I'm just saying this for the benefit of our valued audience. We've already pre-discussed this, you and I. I'm here to just convey some of the more contentious questions about the contentious issue of what happened in Suweida. I'm not adopting any position here. I'm just conveying an order for you to be able to critically evaluate the government's position on this. So I would like to start by you just giving me a brief as you can, version of events of what happened in Suweida according to the Syrian government. What is it, what happened, according to your perspective?
First, there's no brief version of that, not because of the complicated nature of the events itself, but there is no brief way to describe when innocent people lose their lives.
Sure.
For different reasons, whether it is the violence that comes with chaos, or is it, whether it is because of the narrow interests that some individuals really see their interests through, and they're willing to throw the interests of the community, the interests of the country under the bus for them to be able to achieve their own interest. But in summary, I mean, after the liberation of Syria, after the fall of Assad, we've faced a situation in Suweida that was a continuous continuation of the policies of the Assad regime, in a sense. In 2023, when Suweida basically erupted for different reasons against the Assad regime. The Assad regime created a new reality in the province. Yes, it was willing in a way to negotiate or delay its comeback into the province, but it did create multiple military factions within the province to ensure
Divide and rule.
exactly. One, divide and rule, but also to ensure continuous presence in the province in a less official way. So we've seen, Lu'ay al-Ali, other officials in the intelligence, establishing different militias and armed groups within the province. Many carried assassinations, many carried drugs trafficking, and many ensured, again, like this continuation of the military presence. When the regime wanted something done, they can just use one of those military groups to achieve those goals without really directly intervening within the
So
province.
advanced battering rams,
Exactly.
plausible deniability in the whole thing.
I don't know how plausible was that deniability, but in a sense, the Assad regime didn't really care about that. So we did inherit that. But in addition to that, basically, the presence of those military groups created a safe haven for officers from the regime, whether Druze or not, to come into the province to seek refuge, in a sense, by the environment that those groups created. So from day one, as the government basically took over and was taking over a DDR process, a disarmament process, of course, the focus of this process needed to be the remnants of the Assad regime, which basically created an opportunity for Iran to come back, for the regime to come back, because the focus has been not to turn back before December 8th. We're not going
we're not turning back the clock, is what you're saying.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But that created a challenge because, in a sense, those pro-regime, even I can say current IRGC affiliated groups, they kind of went back to their more sectarian groups or sectarian background. They went back to their small communities. And basically, instead of saying, oh, we're pro-regime, they were like, oh, no, we're just Druze, we're Alawites, we're this group or the other.
So hiding among the multitude of their own kind of sectarian background, local identity.
I mean, in some cases, this local identity took a more local perspective, even if it was like a Muslim Sunni. But in other more common forms, it was, yes, a more sectarian identity.
Right.
So that was always a challenge because whenever basically the government needed to work on resolving this, it was always confronting like the sectarian identity that saw itself as one unit, in a sense. Or there was always a fear that by targeting basically those groups, it would be understood as a more sectarian targeting rather than its political nature, which is, again, going after remnants of the Assad regime and officers of the Assad regime who, until December 8th, were with the regime.
Right.
So that was always a challenge. So we tried to work around that for so many months. The focus has been that on one hand, the government is not going to try to use groups within Suweida against each other. The idea was, okay, how can we support basically many of the groups so they can try to resolve issues with those groups, where it's possible, do reconciliation, where it's possible, do disarmament, where it's possible, put pressure on those who are now willing to take in consideration the interests of the province and the community itself. And we've worked with in the last few months specifically on improving the security sector there by basically opening the doors for members of the Druze community. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, between February and June, we've recruited a little bit over 700 of the Druze community, both in the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior.
Hmm.
That's not a big number for a province like Suweida, and there were reasons for that, because people basically who were, or individuals who were trying to join the military or the security were threatened, whether indirectly or whether directly, basically, through themselves, their families, or indirectly by threatening to cut aid, by cutting social ties, by some
Ostracization and what have you.
exactly. So that was always a challenge.
Hmm.
And in a sense, the government has always chosen that we don't want to get into a military conflict. We don't want to resolve this issue through military means. Because for a specific reason, not because of the lack of will or the lack of means, but specifically because Syrians have witnessed 14 years of war. And we do believe that 14 years of war are enough. We do believe that people are tired of war, and we do believe that in addressing any of our problems, there are always, a collection of tools that you can use, but there are many political, peaceful tools that you can always use that are in the best interest of the community. What happened earlier, basically, or last month in July, since we're in August, the tensions between the Bedouin and the Druze community in Sweden are not
Escalated.
new. Are not new, yeah. The problem is with the absence of the state, those small armed groups, numerous of them basically, the only way for them to make money is through captagon trade, through stealing, through kidnapping. So basically, also all sort of illicit activities have flourished in the province in the last 6 months. The main issue that became kind of like sort of tension between the Druze and Bedouin communities is basically the kidnapping for ransom, which created a major issue. Again, and over the last few months, that was, for example, one of the issues where it was the cause for the governor of Suweida. Basically, his office was attacked. He was beaten
Yes.
by one of the armed groups because he was trying to kind of like put a stop for a lot of those kidnapping for ransom.
Talking about Governor Mustafa Bakur.
Exactly. The issue that happened, basically, there was a tradesman who was, kidnapped first for ransom. The other side responded by
Kidnapping back 10
exactly
individuals.
from Qawas, and then there was like a kidnapping back. But the situation over 2 days, basically, of attacks, small attacks here and there, and kidnapping, there were around 50 casualties between the Druze and the Bedouins. And we got to a level where we're calling on every side basically to calm things down, to allow the government basically to resolve this issue,
Right.
to, let everyone be free.
Hmm.
But it reached a level where we got, I think, 50 or 51 casualties between the Druze and the Bedouins. And there was a siege set on the Bedouin neighborhoods on Suweida. And that's where kind of like things reached the level that it couldn't really be, let alone. So the government decided basically to go in through the Damascus-Suweida highway and basically use that highway as a buffer zone between Bedouin communities in the western side of the province and Druze communities in the eastern side and in the city. And basically, the government was acting as a peace force in that sense, separating the two forces. The first thing that happened, the first night basically that happened, is that on that night, the quote unquote military council of Suweida attacked the government forces, killing 15 and kidnapping around 30 from the Ministry of Defense. And that, in a sense, escalated things to the other level, because we're not now dealing, with a local issue. We're trying to resolve things. We're dealing with an active aggression, against the government forces who are trying to break things away. There were immediate communications with all of the Druze leaders, not only with Bal'ous and Suleiman Abdel Baqi, but also with Yahya Hajjar, with Jarbour, with Hinnawi, you name it, with Hassan Atrash. All of the leaders you can think of, including Al-Hijri, were communicating and told, we can't tolerate this situation. This needs to end. And we need to basically get everyone out, not only the Bedouins who are, if their families who are being held hostage and Qawas and other areas are not released, are going to launch an attack, but also, a lot of the families where the Ministry of Defense soldiers were taken from, like we're risking like a more social breakout between Druze and so many
Conflagration,
communities,
yes.
yes, and many communities. So we're very clear, we need to end this, we need to stop it. Let us go and basically end that situation in the Bedouin neighborhoods in the city and allow those people to come back, and we'll keep the situation as is. Of course, while those conversations are happening, the attacks from the military council continued on multiple locations, on the outskirts of the city, on the western side of the province. So basically, as those conversations, were emerging, and again, the Bedouins, restarted their attacks, we made a very clear decision that this situation cannot continue. We need to go in, we need to release everyone who is held hostage, but mainly we need to break the siege on the Bedouin neighborhoods of Suweida, and we want to resolve that in the most peaceful way that could be possible. Long story short, in a very short period of time, basically over a few hours, the military entered and basically broke the siege on those neighborhoods and took most of the city. And we made a very clear decision there. Of course, it's always not a good idea to send your military into to deal with street wars and fighting military groups within civilian populations. So even though militarily it was advantageous for the government to continue its operation, to really, and especially um, uh, military council presence in east of the province, we made a very cautious position to actually seize everything, pull the military out. That's before any intervention, and basically just put the Ministry of Interior inside the city.
Mhm.
And the decision was, we don't want, again, a military solution. We tipped the scale enough, basically, to push for a political solution. Let's stop there. Let's just enforce. And basically, in a matter of hours, the army was pulled out. The Ministry of Interior was pulled in, distributed all across the city. And basically we're sitting with all of the Jews leaders, including Al-Hajri, basically, who made a statement through his Facebook page, basically agreeing to, having the Ministry of Interior coming in and all of that. Overnight, basically until the morning, Al-Hajri made a reverse statement. What we understood happened, his son, basically, who's spending more time in Israel than he's spending in Syria and Arne, called basically for Israeli backup. And we've seen those large attacks on the Ministry of Interior presence and, across Suweida. And in matter of hours, we have had hundreds of casualties between dead and injured. And that's why we were still talking to the different leaders of the Jewish community within Suweida, including Hijri himself, to try to calm things down and our message was very clear. We're here to help, but mainly we're here to prevent something much worse from happening. Let us be the force to break this fight. Otherwise, we don't want the different communities to be facing each other and solving their own issues on their own hands. Unfortunately, no one listened, but I think more importantly, by calling on the Israelis to intervene, which is something, of course, Israel would have loved to kind of create more tension and more division within the community, the government was left with zero ability, basically, to stay in the city. Even at that time, the governor actually was in the city still trying to negotiate when the Israelis were hitting our positions. And as you saw, the Israelis also hit the Ministry of Defense or the Chief of Staff here in Damascus. Not for anything, but for them, it was a good show. Especially when all the TV cameras were.
It did leave a mark.
Absolutely, absolutely. So at that point, there was nothing left, to be honest, that the government can do. Let's keep in mind also, which is very important, we are in a post-Civil War state where the state is relatively new, the government is relatively young, but also the force of the state is limited in the sense in its ability to really enforce law and order across the whole country. We are where we are today based on collective discipline among all Syrians. We have all agreed after December 8th, one way or the other, basically, that we want this experience to succeed and we don't want to go back to civil war. And that's why we have been successful in the last 8 months, basically, maintaining the peace to relative extent. The problem with collective discipline, if it's basically based on collective buy-in. If one person or one group breaks that, discipline, everyone breaks. And
Right.
that's exactly what happened in Sweden.
Okay.
The government is out. We've seen the unfortunate violence that took over like the province. And I can tell you from the moment Israeli intervention happened, the violence escalated, our priority remained the same, which is we want to put in ceasefire and we want to break away the tension that caused all of this. So from day one of the violence, our message was very clear. Stop shooting, release civilian hostages, and we will work on calming everyone down. Uh, the main problem has been for the few days of fighting and even the 10 days after, there was always resistance to really release civilian hostages. And I'm not talking about fighters. I'm talking about at least 1,500 Bedouin women, children, and elderly who were held hostages in Kafar and Shahba. And those were basically the main reason why attacks, not only this time from the tribes and the Bedouins, but also from many communities who felt the injustice that those people are going through. Of course, in addition to all of those, as we call them, faza'at, basically, and we've seen in the report of, from the events of the coast, the self-mobilization among Syrians when the events in the coast happened, were around 200,000 fighters. And that's, I think, probably a small force of the much bigger fighting force in Syria right now that is outside the institutions of the state. Because we need also to be very clear here about fact. And I'm sorry, I'm jumping to specific facts here because I think it's important for
This is
people
your
to know.
bit, so take your time.
Thank you. When the Ministry of Defense was established, the HTS coalition basically used its own coalition, which has its own command and control structure. It's been trained over 5 years. It used that coalition to spread across different pieces of the army to ensure that there is a transition of experience.
Right.
And basically, a lot of groups were called in. The problem with I guess, the liberation in a sense is that a lot of fighters, there is no forced conscription anymore. A lot of fighters felt that the fight is over. So why do I need to stay in this pool of fighters now going into the Ministry of Defense? You're going to pay me $150 salary a month.
I can get 300 working construction.
100%. I mean, at least 300.
But I get to keep my gun.
100%. And that has been our main problem from day one. You have this large pool of fighters that has been outside the force. I mean, of course, every Syrian is armed to the teeth now. But we're talking about experience.
Not this guy.
I mean, you're armed with your pen, you're armed with your tongue. But I mean, I think majority of Syrians are really armed, with actual weapons.
Yes.
And it's a natural result of a 14 years civil war. The problem with that is, in a state like the state of Syria today, after a civil war, everyone feels that they do own this experience, and they do rightly so. The problem is a lot of people, when they feel the state is threatened, they want to take things on their own hand. Not because they support the government necessarily, but because, again, they don't want the clock to turn back into the era of Assad. And I mean, I think naturally, the majority of Syrians are traumatized of that era. So they're willing to do anything basically to make sure we're not turning back. If you remember when the events in the coast happened, people were describing it as a coup attempt. And in a sense, this description of a coup attempt, again, it's not a protectionist move of the current government, even though I think there's a lot of support there. But I think it's a protectionist move for the experience itself, for the fact that Assad is gone.
Right.
So that is the situation we're dealing with right now. I think what really didn't help in Suweida, I mean, of course, what happened since the ceasefire, I can tell you the majority of our work has been since the ceasefire. One was on cementing the ceasefire itself, making sure the reasons that led us to the fight itself do not come back, mainly the holding civilians as hostage, which thank God, we've secured every one of them out as of last Tuesday.
Okay.
But also it's those communal tensions, within the community. But I think the main challenge that has been facing us is, what do we do about Israel? And I think the main issue here is that at every turn, we're seeing attempts from leaders within the Druze community who really don't want this ceasefire, who really don't want this peace to hold. And they're calling, as we've seen today, like every single day there is an attempt, one way or the other, to reestablish this fight. I don't know if it's a promise of military support. I don't know if it's a promise of a Druze state led somewhere in the south. The one thing I know that whatever this is, it's not for the interest of the Druze community. It's not for the interest of Syria. And it's definitely not going to bring the selfish personal glory that some in Suweida hope for themselves.
Okay. Thank you for this brief, not so brief, because this is a complex
Yes,
situation, and I wanted you to have full
appreciate
capacity
that.
to unpack this from uh, the state's perspective. Um, there's a book that's called Seeing as a State. And now you're doing that on our behalf. My time right now is to give you the alternative viewpoint here. There are several issues that you've, to me, mentioned that are key. Lack of capacity for a budding, barely out of the ashes state apparatus, part of which has not been like there was a clear attempt to discontinue from the old regime. There are people who came from fresh from fighting, left the fighting with their arms ready on beck and call if their family or street buddies call them. Um, the state attempted to go and enforce peace, is what you're telling me. Um, there is tons of documented evidence of fighters who are either wearing insignia or with the fighting groups from the Bedouin tribes or the Arab tribes walking into Suweida on day one and day two, um, committing some very heinous crimes. Um, tensions are high. This is a post-civil conflict. It's easy for people who are panicking to act based on panic and go violent. This is not a justification. This is just an attempt to understand. And the state's role is an adjudicator. It certainly sounded like what you're trying to tell me
Yes,
is the role that the state foresees for itself.
yes. The adjudicator of this self-discipline or collective discipline and among Syrian communities.
So we're escalating this to the state, which will come in between social groups that have each of their just or unjust fears, panics, desires to take things out on the street, whatever it is. The tensions are not created by this state. This predates even the modern Syrian state itself. This is a history of conflict and negotiation and then peace and then conflict and negotiation and peace amongst these components in Suweida province. But this is a situation that you know very well, and you know you have very little capacity to contain your own forces, because I remember General Ahmed Dalati speaking while sitting in a madafi alongside Al-Hajri, saying in Arabic, please be lenient upon us. Our troops are not trained enough. They're not disciplined enough. We will discipline everyone we catch doing something wrong, but we need to
Yes.
get this admission of lack of capacity.
That was in the first day, basically, after.
Second day, basically. Second day, I remember.
That was before the Israeli
Yeah, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
Before Israeli
First day of
intervention.
entering the city, second day of the whole conflict.
But first day of commitment of what
yeah.
what you call individual events, what is more than individual events, aggregated, uh, lacking discipline, at least. If you have troops that are lacking in discipline, if you have no capacity of stopping 200,000 potential fighters, each of whom have left their arms on them, but are ready to jump in when called for a faza, whether it's justified or not. What business do you have going into Suweida in the first place? You're the force of law and order that cannot maintain law and order amongst its own troops or amongst the Arab tribes that you cannot stop from flooding into Suweida province. The entire premise of your intervention was to stop things from escalating. Well, 3 weeks later, if this is not an escalation, I don't know what is.
Let's start with the premise first, because you mentioned a lot about the uniforms, the videos, all of that. I can take you now and go like under the what's called now the Freedom Bridge, and you will see the uniform of the الأمن العام of the general security being sold there. We don't have a uniform code yet, and that is very important. Not every fatigue. I mean, like countries have their own uniform code. They have their own
Correct.
fatigue code that
Correct.
is country specific, because when you see that fatigue, you want to be able to identify, even if the flag is not there, that I know this fatigue is for like this country's army.
Excellent. Let me counter that by saying,
Let me finish first, yeah, on the
finish this
yeah,
part. Okay,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
So we don't have that.
Yeah.
So when people say like, oh, we've seen, like there are videos of, the army and the security forces, I'm like, there are definitely individual violations that happen from members of the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior. The government, the president, everyone is acknowledging that. But basically, collectively saying like, oh, this is all done by them, or this was more than individual, it's a big discipline problem. I think this is contrary to the reality. One, because the code is not there, as I mentioned, which is an issue. I mean, when it comes to the issue of resources that the government is having, I mean, I can tell you that this is like, again, when you want to have like one major uniform that you create yourself that no one else can, that also takes resources for the country. But I think the most important like element here, when related to your question, when the choice for us is to really intervene and have losses, and of course, like as someone who commands individuals in a fight, no one actually wants to put their soldiers in harm's way.
Of course not.
But the options were either you let that happen and you let basically people kill each other, or you take the chance where you can actually stop the fight. And I think we took that chance from early on. And I think without Israeli intervention, I don't think we would have seen any of what we have seen today. But I'll tell you in numbers when it comes to violations specifically. When we're still looking into the issue of fighters that were held basically as prisoners, basically, or are detained by the different factions in Sweden. So we're looking at numbers, figuring out how many people are held. From the first day of the ceasefire, the numbers for us are clear. It's a little bit less than 60 people. 30 of those were taken on the first night of the fight. That's basically the operation that instigated this whole thing. So you tell me that I have an undisciplined force. If I do have no, whoever it is, yeah.
The general was saying.
Yeah. If I have, no, but I mean, I know what General Dalati was saying. Yes, we do have an undisciplined individuals, but we don't have an undisciplined force. And the difference is very important. If I do have an undisciplined force, the number of fighters that I would be missing from the different ranks of the Ministry of Interior and the
would be
Ministry
much
of
higher,
Defense
is what you're
would be
saying.
in hundreds. It's not going to be 30.
Fine. So again, just this technicality that you're talking about. I can buy army fatigues that belong to some faction or none. How do I tell those armed people manning checkpoints everywhere around town are official, belong to a disciplined, hierarchically organized law and order force? If I can buy army fatigues and pretend that I am Hayat Tahrir Sham, I am whatever of the old forces, the whole premise of President Sharar coming to power officially the first meeting was a meeting of the factions
Yes.
in which everybody was seated around the room so that the world can see everybody is in line. Everybody is in order. There's an organized force now running Syria. So what you're telling me is we are in a situation where there are official people with uniforms that can be either replicated or that exist multiple uniforms that can, in a situation like that, people can get lost in the mix. And
100%, yeah.
it's up to me to determine as a civilian under duress in Suweida who is who, and then
No, it's not up to the civilian in Sweden to
not to
determine that.
fire, not to fire, like false accusations and get into the khasbara business.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm
But
trying to say?
here, this is the thing. Who is actually launching the false accusations? I mean, I'm someone who've actually been tracking disinformation for a while and working on tracking disinformation for a while. What
You've got
we've
your hands
seen,
busy, I know.
yeah,
Yes.
well, I mean, what we've seen since mid-July until today is probably the biggest disinformation campaign on Syria that I've seen in 14 years.
Hmm.
To the extent, I mean, some of it was intentional, and I can tell you, as someone who's been involved in the negotiations in Suweida, some of it was intentional with leaked information, by one of the parties involved. I wasn't the one leaking information. I can tell you there was a leak on the other side, but it was with the intention to really increase the chances of renewing the fight. I think that was very clear to us. But also at the same time, again, like we've seen, as you've seen on the news, there were news about evacuating all Americans from Syria. There were news about an assassination attempt on President Shara, on the Minister of Defense, that even big news agencies actually took those news and
Ran away with
exactly.
without verification.
So we've seen that. So no, it's not all up. It's not on the, civilians on Suweida or like people who want to protect themselves to try to identify who's who. So, I mean, like people have the right to self defense. The issue here is with the narrative. The problem is we're not the ones building the narrative. As Syrians, we are not the ones building the narrative. We've identified at least 6 countries basically where major disinformation campaign since the beginning of the fight. We're basically leading the narrative on Syria. None of them, I can tell you, have a Syrian majority population. To the contrary, probably. So it was clear when it comes to the narrative, there was not only an attempt to change realities on the ground, but also there was an attempt to shift the narrative in support of those realities or in support of continuing those realities on the ground, where we have this confrontation between not only kind of like what wanted to be seen as a Druze minority and a majority-led government, a Sunni government, but I think the goal was to really instigate a fight between the Druze community and the Sunni community in Syria. Make
Okay.
this basically an issue that Syrians will be fighting on for not only days, but months and years to come.
Okay. Agreed. First of all, I needed to ask you this in the beginning, but it was so exciting I got into this. We can be on first name basis.
Sure, yeah,
You're an official, but
yeah.
I can call you by your first name. So, Qutaiba, my question really is, again, we're circling back to a theme that to me is very clear: lack of capacity. You're faced with a combustible situation that you've been patient on for 7 months. And then on a specific issue that you saw was either necessary or a good time or both for the state to come in and enforce law and order and separate warring communities and, restore peace, lest it get worse. On the second and third day, you've realized this has already gotten worse. The second day it was worse, and then the third day was an Israeli attack. The fourth day was an Israeli attack over Damascus itself. The IDF spokesperson clearly made an allegation. I'm wishing for you to comment on that, that there was a pre-agreement that happened between the Syrian government and the Israeli government, that the Israelis will not interfere with the Syrian forces coming into Suwayda to furnish peace and order. As a matter of fact, in one of the main headlines in Haaretz, I think, There was something said that Israel is waiting for the Syrian forces to come in and restore peace and order, and something to that extent. I'm not saying this to believe anything. I'm just saying this to set up the narrative
Yeah.
for you to counter or clarify. This supposed agreement, according to the IDF spokesperson, was broken when the Syrian forces moved in with heavy pieces of equipment, of military equipment, of tanks, basically. On the second day, tanks were surrounding the National Hospital in Suweida. There were reports of, I have a friend of mine who was actually shot while trying to escape, was being treated at the hospital and saw the tanks attack, and then, you know, was almost being taken out on the street until an aerial attack with drones from the Israeli side happened. He didn't know it was the Israeli side. He heard it in the news afterwards. So the Israelis claim that the Syrian side, our side, broke a verbal agreement, some kind of unwritten agreement that Israel shall not interfere as long as Syria did law enforcement, but not enter heavy equipment. How untrue is that? Or true is it? Was there a pre-agreement in Baku as has been circulated?
Yeah.
I'm
I
sorry.
yeah.
I'm sorry, but
No, no,
I
please.
do have to ask these questions because these are swirling around. I'm not adopting or not adopting these. As an observer, it doesn't sound far-fetched because the timing is it makes sense, right? We are in advanced talks with the Israelis. It's been announced by even Syrian officials that we are in advanced talks. There are contentious issues, but we are still talking. So it makes sense to assume that what was said on the Israeli side has some ring of truth to it. How true or untrue is that? And how self um, motivated was Israel? Because in your narrative, it sounds like the Israelis were sitting and waiting until somebody in Suweida decided, hey, Israel, come. And they said, okay. That also doesn't sound very plausible to me. So, where does the truth lie in
Mm.
between these two polar opposites, do you think?
Back in February, Prime Minister, actually since December, between December and February, Prime Minister Netanyahu made two visits to Washington. Some of his discussions back then were focused on Gaza, but a big part of his
Chunk of that
discussion
was
was on Syria. And his vision, at least that he presented to
he's not very happy
Washington,
with what's happening, right?
absolutely not. And basically, what Netanyahu was saying at the time is we see what's happening in Damascus as a precursor, basically, to another October 7th in Israel 30 years down the line. He's saying that if we let this thing in Damascus grow,
He doesn't have 30 years on himself, but
30 years down the line,
mm,
Turkey and Syria are going to invade Israel and do something worse than October 7th.
mm,
These are not my words. These
mm.
are
BB's.
Bibi's words, basically, in Washington. So that is the perspective, at least, that Bibi is coming from. But also, what was his proposal back then? Let's divide Syria into three areas of influence. An area run by the Israelis, an area run by the Turks, an area run by the Russians, and kind of like a central Syria, that is just abandoned. Like the best thing that could happen for Syria is just to divide the country and just leave it as is. At least the best thing that could happen for Israel and Syria. And that was the perspective. Regardless of what you hear and after, at least this was the narrative in Washington. I don't believe this narrative changed since then. At perhaps at least until recent history, because the actions are very much telling.
Yes.
Going to the videos and like the issue of the agreement. Let me take you to the evidence that we saw on the ground itself.
Okay. Because you've been
How
you've
many?
been into Suweida several times, right?
I've been around the city. I haven't been into the city yet.
Okay.
How many destroyed tanks and like heavy artillery can you
Pieces.
see in
Yeah.
Suweida or in Suweida province? You tell me.
I haven't
There
been.
was
You're the guy who's been,
there
so.
was one artillery that basically like heavy artillery, basically what you call like an armored عربة نقل مصفحة.
Oh yeah, so an APC, armored
An
personnel
APC,
carrier, yes.
exactly. That was targeted
Yes.
outside, way outside actually, Suweida city, like basically on the highway. But everything else that was targeted is actually Ministry of Interior. We
Mm.
haven't seen Ministry of Defense targets in Suweida. And we actually, when it comes to Israeli attacks, we don't have Ministry of Defense casualties from Israeli attacks. We do have Ministry of Interior, high number of Ministry of Interior casualties. So if the Israeli claim is that, oh, we had an agreement, we've seen the heavy artillery movement, why are you attacking the police force if that was the issue?
So what you're telling me is no heavy equipment. The Israelis are lying. And your line of the story is we only got into Suweida. Um,
I'm telling you, this is the data.
right. No, no, I get it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. I get it. And the Israelis were basically on call. Bibi was sitting, waiting for Sheikh Muwaffaq Tarif to call him because Sheikh Hajari called Muwaffaq Tarif, or his son was visiting. And over a coffee, they said, well, we need you to help us with these Syrian Interior Ministry forces. Please bomb them out of
I'm telling you,
existence.
there's a suspicious series of events that were happening at the same time.
Hmm.
One, the movement in Sweden itself, and we've seen again continuous presence for Salman al-Hajri or a lot of troops for Salman al-Hajri into Israel from Arni, where he's staying
Yes.
in occupied areas of Syria. We've seen increased Israeli activity and support for the militias in Sweden. And along with that, we've seen a lot of preparation politically in Washington by pro-Israeli groups. That might be all a coincidence. I don't believe in a lot of coincidence. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but also I don't believe in a lot of coincidence in
So,
policy.
so the issue that, for example, there had been some kind of form of agreement in Baku, which predates the intervention of the Ministry of Interior into Suweida, that's a coincidence you're willing to let slide. But these coincidences in Washington are not coincidences. It's either a series of, because you can correlate. What I'm trying to say, what basically makes that narrative false?
Which narrative?
The narrative that there had been a pre-agreement that the Syrian side had, in a sense, given some assurances, made some obligations onto itself. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I'm
No,
not
no,
a,
I do understand
again,
that. Yeah.
I'm trying to push back because these are questions that I've received and you've agreed
I
to.
think so. Here's the thing. The matter here
Mm,
that people are asking,
mm.
not that whether there is an agreement or not. The question is, was there an agreement that the government violated that caused basically those series of events?
And
And
you're
what
saying
and what I'm
nada.
saying, the evidence on the ground is telling us a completely different story.
Okay,
And that's what we need to look at.
okay.
So when Israeli is saying like, oh, we had an agreement and this was violated and we took action, my response is look at what you're saying, there was an agreement not to enter heavy equipment, and that's why you took action. But what I see on the ground that you have only targeted the police force, basically, that was keeping the peace. The Ministry of Defense was not attacked. The Ministry of Defense, as you said,
You
forces
mean
from
the
the Ministry of
forces,
Defense.
yes.
Yeah, the forces of the Ministry of Defense took Suweida hospital, took basically majority of the city, and then were pulled out. And it was the police force who was stationed in the city. So if the goal of the Israeli attack, as the Israeli government is trying to frame it, as in like, oh, it's a response to this violation, then
Where are
I
the
would have
pieces?
exactly where are the pieces first, and then if that is the reality, why didn't you attack the ministry like the Ministry of Defense forces on day one? The reality is there was, I mean, whether it's a coincidence or not, the situation in Suweida created an opportunity for Israel to intervene and basically push forward for a situation where they can have more cards on the table, utilizing individuals on Suweida who were actually willing, knowingly willing to bring Israelis on board with
Mhm.
everything that Israel brings on the table. They were willing to bring that forward. regardless of how much the whole country can lose because of those actions. This is the reality.
All right. Granted, let me ask you based on that. I'm just piggybacking of what you're saying right now. So, Qutayba, do you feel played? Do you feel entrapped? Because this is another scenario that's swirling around, that the Syrian government is in a learning curve, is trying to do things, no malice, no intent, under-equipped, under-capacitated, and under-experienced. And you've been caught in an April Gillespie moment of sorts. You know, the
Yeah,
American ambassador to Iraq, who is supposed to have said to Saddam Hussein that whatever you do with Kuwait is none of our business, which was taken as a green light. Were you trapped? Were you guys bamboozled and taken for a ride and then caught in a situation out of which you could not extricate
yeah,
yourself? Is that a thing? Or can
yeah.
you dispel that notion?
I don't know if we were trapped or not, because again, that gets us into the conspiracy theory part. I think I agree were mistakes. I think we should have seen basically the link between Israeli actions and seen that basically Israel is going to take any opportunity to push forward such agenda. I think we should have seen that coming. Are we learning basically from our mistakes? Yes, absolutely. I mean, you described the situation at the beginning.
How?
No, no, I mean, in
How are
all
you
of our
learning from your
process,
mistakes?
yeah, yeah. I mean, so I mean, like we spoke about like one small thing, like about the issue of the uniform code, for example. Like one of the first issues now, like the Ministry of Interior is prioritizing to work on, is to actually come up with the not only the uniform code as in like something that you can identify, individuals, not by name or by number, but actually figure out, yes, like what's our uniform code and how can we make sure that we're the ones basically producing this, that basically members of the general security, of the government security, are recognizable, and not everyone basically who holds a weapon and wears a black trousers and a black shirt is a member of the general security. So that is I think there are many like lessons we can look at since December. But again, this is the thing when you said at the beginning, when you described the situation, we do understand what the situation is like. And no one willingly, just based on a realistic assessment, would come in and be kind of like part of taking on this job. If you want to think rationally about this, I would have stayed in Washington. I wouldn't have come back. No one, I mean, like there is nothing rationally appealing, about taking this responsibility.
You remember I was telling you that the other day. I mean, God bless you for doing this, but what the hell is going through your head?
It is the right thing but we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. Because if I'm not doing this, and if you're not doing this, and if others are not doing this, who's going to be left to do this for the country, and who's going to be left to do this for the people?
Yes.
And this is at least, after 14 years of war, where every Syrian single household has a detainee or has a martyr. At least I think what we can do is take on that responsibility.
Right.
Are we going to have we done a lot of mistakes? Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to continue to do mistakes? Yes, absolutely. Because we are witnessing an era for Syria where finally we have some political life. We're able to take things, on our own hands as Syrians. We have a proud, very young, very immature, but also very proud experiment right now in Syria. And we do believe that the Syrian people deserve all of us, not only Syrians and others, to do our best for this experiment to success.
Okay. So I have a series of things that I want to ask you before I open up the floor for some people to ask us, field some questions. There are now, so
I get some water while you
yes, please.
asking
Yes,
another
we're going to
question.
get you some water.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for that.
No, no, no worries.
Yeah.
For those of you watching, we just got the AC back with
Thank
this.
God
Thank
for
God,
that.
yeah.
Okay. Because it is quite warm, and this is an understatement. And thank you for tolerating this.
No, no, of course.
I'm trying here again. I'm not a party to this discussion, but I'm trying to ask provocative, critical questions, some of which I received
No, no,
from.
I really appreciate it. I think every Syrian or majority of Syrians are thinking of those questions, and there is like absolutely like no one should shy away from asking those questions. This is not the Assad government. We're done with that.
Let us
We're
hope
done
it
with
is.
that life.
Yeah,
We're done with
yes,
that era.
we've buried that.
This is the time for us to question. And again, like this is not an easy inheritance that we in the government are dealing with. But
Like,
at the same time, everyone has, the absolute right to question the government in every single thing that we're doing,
right.
and we should be responding. So I really appreciate you
Very
the
good.
opportunity.
Thank you for saying this. It means a lot to me. So about the situation right now. I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote
Yeah,
from a friend of mine. Um, he comes from a very proud family. Day one with the revolution, had to escape. Him, his brother, his sister, his parents stayed behind. His father is a famous author, one of Syria's finest. Had a beautiful house that he bought out of his own, you know, work. Never touched anything related to the state, former state in the past. Has a beautiful, large library full of rare books in a village called Tara in Suwayda's western um, outskirts to the north. So that's a contentious point between Dara and Suweida, where the Arab tribes used to roam.
yeah.
Um, his entire village got ransacked, pillaged, and then whatever they couldn't steal was burned. I can assure you that the villagers themselves did not do that. They escaped the village. The village is
I've
now
seen footage of that. Yeah.
right. And my friend's father lost his life's passion, his library. It's great that he didn't lose any immediate family members. I have
Alhamdulillah.
another friend of mine. I have another friend of mine, also revolutionary, also my friend in Canada, somebody who was getting into fights, verbal sparring fights with other Syrians that did not like the Islamist bent of this regime, the past that it had, were afraid of it, were secular, based on sectarian divides, etc. And he was fighting, Druze himself, his co-religionists, but also other Syrians, telling them, we need to give this state some time. Nothing happens in a day. This takes time for us to do this. I have belief in this in this government. And on the second day, his younger brother was taken out of a car and shot dead in front of his mother and his two sisters for no reason or no justification. There are tons of these stories. We can say these are all rumors, this is fabrications, etc. But when it comes close to home, you understand people right now have trauma upon the trauma of the previous regime. And what I want to utilize these stories is to tell you right now, there was a situation prior to July 13, I think was the first day of intervention, where almost, we don't have statistics, but a large chunk of people in Suweida were actively and eagerly asking for the state to come in and enforce law and order.
Yeah.
Qutayba, you and I know now today that Hijri or non-Hijri, you have a large chunk of people in Suweida right now who distrust the state, if not are actively hostile towards the state. This bet, this intervention, justified as it were according to your story, has resulted in a net loss of public trust in a province in Syria with a component that has a sectarian specificity that the state is clearly understanding. There's something in between the hopes that were generating your intervention that you've just described, that we've listened to, and the reality that we ended up with, which is a net national loss that needs remedying, that needs time to heal, if it can be healed. It needs an intervention from a lot of people, uqal, people with
Understood.
minds, and what is the state's vision, mid to long term, about resolving this deep traumatic loss of faith in the state project as it stands today in reality?
First, let me address the premise, because you make it seem as if the government did not intervene, things wouldn't have gone this way. And I can tell you, one, when you're faced with the options, do you leave basically people to take things on their own hands? And we've seen examples when people do that in Eastern Ghouta and Damascus under siege, where fighters were left to their own. 600 people were dead in 36 hours in the middle of the siege itself. So there are examples, and it wasn't sectarian. That was, if you want to use sectarian terms, that was Sunni violence. And that still happened. A lot of those were also civilians. So when things are left, to be done by their own, means, yeah, things could have gotten much worse. So the idea that
I'm not going to kufr, lest to be kafir.
no,
I'm just trying to convey the message, but thank you for
no, I
clarifying.
mean, I want to clarify. I mean, regardless of like who's saying it, this is very important.
Yes.
Was there another solution to this? I think there could have been a better way of, managing the situation, but under the circumstances, considering Israeli intervention, there is nothing. I don't know if there is much that could have changed the outcome that we have today, because the main factor that led us to where we are today is the Israeli intervention, is not the government's actions or interventions in Sweden to stop the fight. It is the Israeli intervention to allow the fight to continue that led us to where we are today. And that is very important. Yes, I mean, of course, we've seen that violence, across Suweida. Not only, and again, like, yes, I totally connect with the stories of people who lost their homes in western side of Suweida. Again, like I've seen those scenes. But also, I mean, there were a lot of losses in Bedouin neighborhoods in Suweida itself and,
Totally, yes.
and across the countryside of Suweida.
Yes.
I think the experience itself of 1,500 of women, children, and elderly, almost no men basically, being held hostage by their own neighbors, by the families who they thought, they're connected with, for a little bit over 10 days, it's also traumatizing socially. The experiment of Hadari Sunnis basically on Suweida, who were just killed in Suweida because they're Sunnis, is also taking away from that fabric the society is having. So we need to be very clear about, like the grievances that we have. This is not only, I mean, and I totally understand as a minority community what the Druze community is going through, but this is not only a Druze grievance. We have grievances across the whole region and a little bit beyond. So let's, and we need to acknowledge that, because we were talking about the future, because without acknowledging that, we can't all move forward. We can't keep denying basically the fears that, of course, minority communities have, because they are minorities in terms of numbers. But also we can't continue to ignore the grievances that a lot of people have. And they have grievances of the Assad regime and anything that in any way, shape, or form is connected to the Assad regime. And without addressing and acknowledging those two grievances, we really can't move forward. And this is not regardless of what the government can do. In this situation that Syria is in, and again, with the existence of this, the biggest force in Syria in terms of military force is not the government. It is the Syrian people. And again, for this experiment to happen, regardless of who's in government, whether it is Ahmed Shara or someone else, it needs this collective discipline, and it needs this collective willing from all Syrians to decide to move forward as one force.
Beautiful. Let me ask you a question.
So let me tell you first on
Yes.
what needs to happen. I mean, I can tell you on Suweida, we have our main track has been let's just diffuse the situation. Release the hostages, which we were able to secure after very long negotiations.
Yes.
Release the detainees, basically, of fighters, which has still not been secured. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is, I mean, on one hand, there isn't command and control structure in Sweden. There are so many different small armed groups.
Yes.
But also what we've seen is that many of those who were detained were actually killed on the spot. So this is also creating a lot of tension. So what we were saying, release the detainees, but also allow the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, ICRC to come in and collect the bodies and at least be able to bring something back for the families who are still waiting.
Yes.
And there are a large number of families outside Suweida, basically, who are waiting for their relatives. And there is a risk when, if that does not happen, that basically, yes, those people, will instigate another fight because Syrians rightly have nothing to lose anymore. So we need to move forward. We need to stop the bloodshed right now. We need to stop the losses right now. We do have a lot to lose. And that's what we're telling all Syrians.
Right.
It's
beyond the immediate, do you foresee some kind of mid to long-term solution? First of all, will the situation right now in Suweida, as I've understood, and please clarify if my understanding is wrong, be policing, wearing uniforms, state uniforms, as in to acknowledge the officialdom of the Syrian state?
I mean, that is a small thing. Like this is not a part of this. So let me tell you, like the solution basically has the two tracks. On one hand, there needs to be accountability.
Yes.
And that's what the Ministry of Justice with a special prosecutor would basically be doing, basically looking at the facts and bringing people to justice. Of course, I'm gonna answer a question you might probably have. You're gonna tell me like, oh, we haven't seen anything in the coast. We haven't seen accountability. What we've seen from the events of the coast, we've seen a lot of arrests. But yes, we haven't seen any actual courts. And that applies not only to people who committed violations in the coast, it also applies to the regime folks.
Yes.
We haven't seen any judicial
Because there's
action.
no transitional justice
but also
framework in place, which is another big issue.
I mean, like we can talk about so many like things.
I don't want to go into it, but
course,
I mean,
yeah.
it's linked.
But
it's
it is
linked.
But it is an issue of capacity at the end of the day. I mean, I've worked on transitional justice, studying transitional justice processes across different countries.
Right.
I think there is something that we can do definitely locally, but we do have a major capacity problem.
So what is stopping us from knocking the door of the UN, for example? What is stopping us from knocking the door of the ICG?
Because once you go a little bit universal on transitional justice processes, you're talking about billions of dollars of cost. Our vision is whatever support is going to come to Syria is going to come to Syria. The question is, where would that money come? And there's a short window basically for the international support to Syria, because right now the focus is on Syria. A year or two from now, it's going to be Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, you name it. So there is a window on that. The question that I'm faced with as a government, do I want that international support to come to international prosecutors, to come and set up shop, do accountability, transitional justice, cost me, with the case of Syria, probably between $6 and $10 billion. Do the justice that we want, it would probably take 10 or so years, and then have the country left with nothing. Or do I actually put that money where it matters in the life of every day, of the daily life of every Syrians, and try to figure out how we can move forward and build our own accountability system? It's not an easy choice.
It's not an easy.
And there is no like a single right answer. Our ijtihad, in a sense, is that no, we want to actually make sure that after 14 years of war, that actually Syrians get the most we can get them to be able to move forward. We use our own resources to build our own accountability system.
You're an eloquent speaker. You put points across. You can speak to an audience. Why aren't there any Qutaybas directed inwards? I've visited your ministry. It's I mean, there are people with caliber that have been attracted like yourself from plush jobs in Washington, elsewhere, left everything, came, dedicated, are paying the cost daily, going through traffic, the heat, grilled
The heat,
grilled by
man.
questioning interviewers and
No, no, no.
stuff
I
like
mean,
that.
that's
But
an easy
then
one.
your gaze is directed onto projecting Syria's official position, defending it, being critical about it outwards. To tell you the truth, I've been here for the past, what, 50 days now. I mean, I have not seen on a situation as tenuous, as important, as fragile, as combustible, and as long effect as Suweida. Despite everything that you've told me, I have not seen a singular, unified message delivered with conviction, delivered with some kind of talking to people as if we are adults. This is a chronic shortage in the Syrian state as it stands for the past 8 months. When we're speaking to the world, eloquence, unified message, clarified objectives, top, top, top. When we're talking to the Syrian people, it's either, talking heads, TikTokers, YouTubers,
Influencers, yeah.
you know what I mean? Or it's a mixed messaging, it's post facto, it's never on time, it's never before time. People are not given a clarification of what's happening, and it's costing.
Yeah.
I can tell you as a person, I walk on the streets, I stop people and ask them, I get on taxis, I ask taxi drivers, I ask family members, etc. The level of
You're
trust.
the Tom Friedman of
I'm the Tom Friedman of,
Syria right now.
I know you didn't like me, but that much? No,
Yeah.
but
So,
to be honest, I speak to people because I want to get a vox pop, right? So this is a quick and dirty test. This is
yeah.
not a by any means a scientific experiment. But the level of trust and faith in what the state did and did not do, in what's coming, the level of optimism about, yeah, no, we're going to get through this, has waned so dramatically throughout the past 50 days. When I came into Syria 50 days ago, it was weaker than it used to be before. I'm leaving Syria in a couple of days, and it's now even
Yeah.
weaker. People are dejected. People, I know business people who I know who used to, like 10 days ago, talk about, yeah, well, we're going to get our businesses started up. Some people are moving. I was just with a gentleman right now today who's thinking of moving himself and his family, closed up his shop in the UK, and is now, having
Yeah.
second thoughts. And that's just one business person, etc. I'm talking about even people on the streets who never left the country, who were looking optimistically to that. There needs to be some kind of messaging that clarifies what you're telling me right now in a coherent tone, but that also tells people, we see you. And the state seems to treat everyday Syrians as if they are invisible in the tone and explanation of what's happening, and it's leaving it to people who are less than qualified or populist. What's going to
Yeah.
be done about that?
Yeah. So going back to the premise to start with, and then
You're gonna
I'll answer you.
you're
I
gonna
want to distill the premise because I mean, I think it's very important for people to understand also what the situation is. I mean, I've heard from many people that the government is really putting a lot of kind of like weight and focus on foreign policy and not much on domestic policy. And I think this is not a reflection of the efforts of the state itself. I think it's a reflection of one, where the successes were, but also in a sense where probably like you're seeing like more caliber, from the diaspora coming in. And that's the result of two things. I think on the first one, many people who are encouraged, like, to come in and support, they came in the first couple of months, and the doors were not open in the first couple of months. Rightly so, it was a transition period. Everyone needed to understand what the government is like, is Damascus is functioning on a national level. Yes, it is definitely different from, just
Idlib.
landing Idlib itself. So it took, and I think 3 months is not much, to be honest, but it took 3 months at least to figure out what the situation is like. The problem with that is by the time basically the doors were open to everyone to come in, once the government understood or the leadership understood what the structure is like, everyone was like, "Oh no, I came on day 2 and or day 10, and no one like wanted me to come in." So we've been seeing less enthusiasm about people coming in. I think with the foreign ministry itself, especially in terms of like policy capacity, most of the diaspora who built policy capacity outside Syria, they built it on foreign policy. Not really. I mean, we've seen very few actually who worked on like, different type of like domestic public policy. So in a sense, where we're coming heavy is, yes, our experience with foreign policy. I agree with you that we have an issue with communication. It's not because of, so and that's where I'm getting. It's not because there is less interest in the domestic audience, but it just, our strength is, yes, definitely in our foreign policy. Our success has been in our foreign policy. But it's not because like this has been the main focus. I think we're lucky with the leadership we have with Foreign Minister Shebani, but also we're lucky with the kind of like young dynamic team that basically came in and was able to manage things and push things forward. And I'm hoping that we can transfer that experience across the whole government. Because yes, absolutely, Syrians deserve that. I mean, we need 10 spokesperson at least, like to be able to really talk to Syrians and address the issues that and give them answers for the questions that they do have. That is one. And again, like I share with you completely that there is a need to do that. I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks we'll see faster movement on that in terms of like having different spokespersons, having the ability to communicate more. I wish I can talk more, and I'm here to talk not only to American audience, I'm here to talk to Syrian American
Yes, of
audience.
course. First and foremost.
Absolutely, because I want them to actually hear what's happening. I wish there is like 100 copies of me that I can distribute and just like be able to address, because I do believe in communication.
We like the one copy that we have. Thank you.
No, but yeah, it's very important that we're able to do this.
Yes.
So that is on that level.
Yes.
On the second one, I forgot what was your second point. Remind me again of the.
I forgot what I said. But that's
Yeah.
fine, because I can segue into something that drags us back into Suweida, because I want to close the contention about that. You were able to go and supervise the entry of humanitarian assistance into Suweida. You did not go into Suweida. Were you stopped from entering Suweida, or was it a choice of yours, or was that a government decision that no officials shall go into Suweida?
It wasn't my job to go into Suwayda at that point. So we are managing communications. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the show. It's not about just, hey, showing up, I'm inside Suwayda. I do understand. I mean, if we wanted to, like, we have the connections, we have those channels with everyone in Suwayda to be able to come in and talk. But I know also at the same time, as someone who is taking a little bit of a front line, that for many in Suwayda, many residents of Suwayda, they're not going to be happy to see anyone from the government. I do understand this, and I appreciate you mentioned that there is like probably a lot of mobilization, not necessarily with Al Hajri. I don't think the majority of the Druze community are happy with the Israeli intervention, or happy with the linking the Druze community with Israel, with considering its actions and its policies in the region. But it is a mobilization in a sense against the state because of what they've seen. Because it's in a sense everyone's trying to go back to the main circles, that they know, that they are most familiar with, the family, the sects, rather than the nation or the state. So that is totally understandable. So my job there was not really to be like, I'm trying to help build bridges, trying to help resolve the problems. The government, in a sense, and I've said that the government didn't leave Suwayda. the teams who are working on fixing infrastructure within Suweida are government teams. They didn't come from the military council or quote unquote, I don't know if it actually exists in reality, the autonomous administration of Suweida. They are government teams. They get government salaries, and even at some points, I mean, they were beaten or shot at by military factions within Suweida. The hope is, and I know we've discussed this before. We have two tracks basically. One track is, as I said, accountability, and one track which is very important is to start this reconciliation process locally first between Suweida and its neighbors, whether it is the tribes, whether it is like the rest of Horan and like the vicinity beyond. And one basically where like we have it's more on a national level because we want to make sure that this is not an area where we start a new one that Syrians are gonna and others basically will utilize to start eating off the Syrian body in a sense. I'm quite hopeful to be honest. I know from the premise, and that's what I wanted to mention. From the premise you said it seems way too dark. You know, what's gonna happen? As you said, the perceptions of Syrians, everyone is very pessimistic. I was pessimistic, by the way, during those days, not necessarily because of what was happening, but specifically because of Israeli intervention. And I think for many, again, the images of, you know, what Israel was doing, it's not, I think Syrians like myself are very hopeful about our ability to come together, regardless of the ones we have, and figure out a way forward. But I think what was very clear in this last incident is that the question is of whether Israel is going to allow this experiment to continue or not. And it showed that Israel has the means and has the tools, basically, to break this experiment or to push us again into civil war. And I think, again, I don't have the scientific tools, but I think this is an important element of why many people feel pessimistic, because they've seen and they know what Israel is capable of doing in other places. I'm optimistic, but I mean, again, like in reality, if I wasn't optimistic, again, I would have stayed in Washington. I do believe in the Syrian experiment. I do believe in the Syrian people. And I do believe that despite 14 years of war, the loss of 1 million Syrians, on December 8th, Syrians decided to leave the past behind and move forward, regardless of whatever happened. Yes, there were moments where people were trying, you know, to look back where, you know, things are not stable. There are still some people who are trying to take, you know, justice on their own hand. But I think collectively we have made the decision to move forward. And that's something I think I'll, you know, as Syrian, I'll continue to be proud of for the rest of my life. But also it brings me hope that we can still do this, that regardless of what happens, we can still come back together, figure out what the issues are, work on solutions that work for everyone, where we can continue to live and where we can have like this one big, strong, beautiful country that can bring us together one day, inshallah.
Let's hope. One last question before I try and open the floor because we've overstayed our
That's your
welcome.
third last question.
What?
That's your third last question.
Well, I mean, you make this so appealing that I can't but continue.
Maybe.
I would not leave this for like another 3 hours, but would we see President Shara in Suweida in the future? And would President Shara's visit, if it had happened, if he had decided to visit Suweida a few months ago, knowing, I mean, he's a daring person. The way that he entered Damascus with only 3 people, according to the story, you know, unperturbed, walked in, you know, he has the courage, he has that kind of capacity to do leadership in that sense. If he had decided to visit Suweida, would it have diffused this entire crisis? Would it have allayed a lot of those fears and a lot of those worries, and maybe put into position what you claim is somebody's ambition that shall not be named?
Yeah.
Why didn't that happen? And would we be seeing him in the future? As
I
short
think,
as you can,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
want to open the floor
yeah.
for
I
questions.
mean, we've seen President Shara in Tartus and across the coast. So I think, yes, he will go to Suweida. I think we are where we are because President Shara, along, not in the last only 8 months, but I think in the last 13, 14 years, have took, in a sense, courageous decisions as a leader and pushed himself and people around him to places where they were not comfortable with.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that as a, because he
Compliment of
said,
any
no, no, no,
sorts,
no.
etc.
I think it's a description of the reality of who he is and how he's been. And I think it's a like the story of
Okay.
this whole story of the last 14 years is by itself, I think is remarkable enough to look at. But also I think it's remarkable because it shows that he's willing to take courageous decisions where it matters, regardless of what the public opinion basically says or goes. Because I've heard a lot, it's like, oh, the government is very, is sensitive only to public opinion. Definitely, any government
Should
that
be.
is trying to be representative should be sensitive to public opinion. But when it matters, I think, yeah, the president is willing to take those decisions. Whether that would have resolved things in the past or not, to be honest, I don't really know. And I'm being completely honest. I think the complicated factors we are seeing in Sweden, many we have discussed, many we have not discussed. I think make this a much more complicated issue that would have been resolved by, just showing up on the street. Not for anything because, and I'm saying that because the communication, the dialogue, the connection never stopped. Like even with Al-Hijri himself, and I'm again like I'm being very honest and open here. Like during the fight, yes, there was a time of cutoff where like communication didn't happen because the other side decided they didn't want to communicate directly with the government. But otherwise, the communication didn't really stop. So it's not really a matter of, I think, showing up or like connecting. I'm hoping that would be the next visit to President Shara would be um, just the end of this era and the beginning of a new era where communities can connect back, where um, we can seriously, look forward, put the past behind, not in terms of like burying it, but address actually the past, resolve it, and be able to move forward on a much solider ground. And I think then we will definitely be seeing President Shara leading us into that path forward.
Okay, so there's a question that's addressed to me. Thank you for asking this. No, I'm not a member of the Druze community. I wish I were, but I'm not. I do not claim that honor. I don't know how this is material to the question, but thank you for even asking this. Um, there are two questions that I'm going to shoot at you real quick.
Sure.
So to date, there are 39 displaced villages in Suweida, and a large number of villages remain under the control of fighters who do not belong to the Suweida government, Dara, the official army, or general security. Who are these fighters? What is their legal status? Who gave them the authority to remain in these villages after the operations have ended? Was there any official inventory conducted to determine their affiliation?
There are, so in Sweden today, there are either towns and villages that are under the control of the government, or there are towns and villages and cities under the control of different Druze armed groups. There are no third parties in that sense right now in Sweden. So that actually premise is absolutely false.
So
The
you're
problem,
saying there are none.
there are none. The problem with Suweida, and this has been the problem from day one. If you look at Suweida on the maps,
Yeah.
like this font, this kind of like north, east, and east borders is just desert.
Yes.
So it's just like an entry point, and that has been like even when we were trying to resolve this issue, our message was we can't really protect that part if we were not effectively there. ISIS can go from there. Iranian militias, if they want, they can go. Anyone basically can go from there. It's still, I mean, like
It's
without an,
infiltratable is what you're saying, and
yeah,
there's absolutely no way you can stop this at
absolutely
all.
not. Yeah. So that area remains as such. because again, the state has been prevented from actually
But
doing
the premise of the
reasons.
question is this is on the western side of
No, no,
things.
no. So I'm telling you that except for that part of the province, which is completely desert, yeah, that is no man's land right now.
Hmm.
And that will continue to be a problem. In other parts of the province, there are absolutely no armed groups in control of.
Categorically.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely not.
Okay. Um, Thank you, Zain, for asking about the Syrian economy, but that I think is outside the focus of this conversation, and I don't think Qutaiba is going to have that answer for you. Um, oh yeah, this is a very good question. Thank you, Simon Weiss, for asking this. Um, can we ask why the president thanked the tribes for such a mess and the crimes that they were committed? In his speech, President Shara started by, see, perception is reality at times. And for someone who is PR savvy, as the president has shown in several occasions, for him to intently start by thanking the Arab tribes and then say the Druze community are part of Syria, are our brethren, what have you. Thanking the Syrian tribes sounded like, I mean, at best intention, sleight of hand, at worst intention as we're not against you, we're just talking to the Druze in order to modify
Yeah,
them, etc. If you're
yeah.
like walk in my shoes if I were a Druze, right? And I'm already taken aback by what's happened, etc. This sounds like a slight.
The problem with that is this is a
Again, devil's
specific.
advocate.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I appreciate it. The speech was specifically directed at the tribes for the main purpose of asking the tribes and like the Faza'at to leave the province and stop the fight.
Yes.
This wasn't directed at the Druze community. This wasn't directed at Metropolitan Damascene audience or Metropolitan Alepan audience or to a Washington audience. This was directed specifically at a tribal audience. And I think the president knows well how to address this audience. So within that context of really
It's
achieving
normal
the
courtesy of
yes,
talking to a tribal
yeah.
audience. We like you, you're good, etc. But now calm down.
I
Was
don't
his
want to frame
message?
it this way. The idea is
That's me
the
framing it.
goal is, I mean, you can frame it the
Yeah,
way
no,
you
no,
want.
I'm
It's
not putting words
yeah,
in
yeah,
your
yeah,
mouth. I'm
yeah,
I'm just trying to clarify.
yeah.
This is not what you said. This is me
Exactly.
saying it.
This is part of the message to achieve the goal that we don't want to see this way of handling things. And I think the president, because he's actually dealt with a lot of those communities, especially tribal communities, I think he understands how to address that audience specifically best, especially considering the grievances that that community feels.
Right.
Again, the president was addressing a community that had at least 1,500 women, children, and elderly being held hostage in Suweida. So I think, in a sense, if you ask me, like regardless of like any other calculations, yeah, that was the best way to address that audience to achieve the goal, which is stop the fight, withdraw your forces, let the government handle this issue.
I mean, I've tested your patience and everybody else's patience. I have one question in 1 minute. I
I don't know about the
personally,
1 minute, but sure.
I personally do not really agree with this premise, but it's a provocative question, so I'm going to ask it.
Sure.
Bushra is asking, what is the fate of Hajri at this point? Is he ever going to be prosecuted?
I think that's a question left to the special prosecutor in the Ministry of Justice. I think there is definitely grounds for so many um, legal violations that I would say that at least to say that Hajri has made. But I think at the end of the day, and again, like this is Qutaiba speaking, I can't really speak on behalf of the Ministry of Justice. I think at the end of the day, whether it is the special prosecutor or the Minister of Justice, needs to put the interests of the whole country at hand. If you
Sometimes you got to give a pass.
absolutely, I mean, I think as Qutaiba speaking, I think Hajri's involvement is not helpful for the Druze community. And I don't think he's got the best interest of the Druze community in mind. And I don't think he will be able to lead the Druze community to a place of prosperity and really connecting back with the whole country. Where would that go again? Like at the end of the day, we all have to make hard decisions for the interest of ourselves, for the interest of our own communities, but also for the interest of the country. So as long as we keep that in mind, I think this is the most important element we should be looking at. What is the best interest of the country right now? And then we should decide to move forward based on that. But most importantly, as you mentioned, be very clear as we communicate that to our people.
We better. So one last thing that I'm going to say is thank you, Qutaiba, for allowing us this opportunity. Thank you for braving Damascus's crazy traffic and making it here.
My apologies for the delay on my
No,
end.
I mean, it is Damascus time. Thank you for following Mountada debates. And this is one very difficult decision that I'm going to have to make, which is to end this fascinating conversation. There are tons of questions that I couldn't muster and ask. I wish that we had hours upon hours. Maybe we could do this again, talking about something a little more positive, or maybe something difficult and, contentious. But I want to thank you for coming here again and for being, clear and concise about this and for not taking offense at me pushing
Not
back
at all.
against
Not at all.
the narrative. Please do remain faithful to Mountada debates. We will continue asking these questions, talking truth to power sometimes, but also trying to clarify issues, to discuss with a rational, reasonable manner, representing SF Syrian Forum's own ideas and ideals, but also trying to contribute to Syria by making this discussion reasonable, rational, away from populism, and as beneficial and as positive as we can towards building a new Syria that is beneficial for all of us. Thank you for watching us tonight, and have a great evening. We will see you in a couple of weeks.